Well, good evening, everybody. My name is John Dernbach. I teach the Sustainability Law Practicum class in which the student presentations tonight are being offered. In this class, students draft sustainability ordinances as well as narratives justifying those ordinances. And they do it for specific local governments or local government associations. We are one of the very few law schools in the country to offer a class like this. Tonight, they will be presenting their proposals rather, to a panel of local government experts. The topics for their presentations were chosen by representatives from Cumberland County, the Pennsylvania State Association of Boroughs, the Pennsylvania State Association of Township Supervisors, Susquehanna Township, Swatara Township, and the Tri-County Regional Planning Commission. These same representatives worked with the students in the development of their proposals. We are grateful to them as well as to the state's Legislative Reference Bureau, which has reviewed and commented on drafts of the ordinances being presented. FYI to you all, the students, I got the Legislative Reference Bureau comments earlier today, and I thought it was better for you not to see them until after your presentation.
That doesn't sound encouraging.
No, it's just, this is about controlling for distractions.
Okay.
So 8 proposals are being presented by 16 students who are working in teams of 2. Each presentation, each project has 2 parts. The first part is a narrative that explains the need for the ordinance, as well as the social, environmental, and economic benefits that the ordinance would provide. The second part is a draft ordinance that is intended to increase quality of life in particular municipalities. Each student is allowed 4 to 5 minutes or 8 to 10 minutes per team. The local government officials on the panel will then ask the students questions. The total time for each project, including questions, is 15 minutes. We should be done in 2 hours. The narratives and the ordinances being presented tonight are in draft form. So if you have suggestions or comments, the students are very eager to hear from you. I'm going to ask the panelists to introduce themselves and we will begin.
Good evening, everyone. Nice to see you all on a kind of a wintry night tonight. My name is Robert Eline, and I have a job and an official title. My job is the Director of Planning and Zoning for Swatara Township here in Dauphin County, which is not that far away. And my official title is the Township Zoning Officer. So that has carries some legal implications sometimes when I do testimony or write a zoning verification letter. So those are my 2 main roles are zoning administration and land development planning. Thank you.
My name is Ed Canetto, and I retired last year from the Pennsylvania State Association of Boroughs after many, many years of working with them and serving as a municipal manager a number of municipalities across the state for the better part of 40-some years. I enjoy this part, work with John on a number of these, and these ordinances, we've talked a lot about them early in the summer months of ideas and suggestions. And these are real life needs that we look at, concerns that come from our members. In Pennsylvania, there's 956 boroughs. And so we get a lot of input from them on what their needs are each year and the issues that are coming for them from their residents. And I think this is very, very helpful. We appreciate your willingness to do this.
Good evening. My name is Betsy Logan. I'm the Assistant Township Manager for Susquehanna Township. I have served in the capacity of the Director of Community and Economic Development there for 6 years. I think as I mentioned previously, Susquehanna Township is a township that you're in currently, and we've been using these ordinances and working with this class for the last several years, and are currently in the process of rewriting our ordinance and have incorporated several of the proposed ordinances into that zoning ordinance. So I look forward to hearing your presentations.
And I'm Jerry Duke. I'm the Dauphin County Planning Coordinator with the Tri-County Regional Planning Commission. I've been working with John on this project pretty much as long as I've been here, which is now my 6th year. Prior to that, I was the planning director of community services for a suburb area outside of Pittsburgh, Bethel Park, PA, and then also in private practice and a county planning director in Clearfield County. So as like Ed, I'm not quite retired yet, but I'm kind of long of tooth. So, but one of the things, the valuable things we get out of this is your work as research for us as Tri-County. If you have, anybody's gone on to our website in order to look at some of the examples that are out there, some of those ideas that we have put in our toolkit are some projects that have come from this class. We use the resources, the ordinances, and the background documentation, particularly that first document that is written to help us prepare fact sheets that we give to the local municipalities. And then also we start the building blocks for doing our ordinances based upon some of the building blocks, things you've done. So we're always happy to be part of this and we look forward to it. And then again, we're hopefully this class does as well as ones that we've been fortunate enough to be sitting with in the past. So with that, I think what we're going to do, are we ready to start?
Yes.
Okay, so as John has indicated, it's 5 minutes, or total 8 minutes total for both of you. And then we're going to get 5 or so minutes here. I'll kind of direct the questioning from our end here so that we kind of wrap it up and so that we are not here until 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. So you're ready to roll? Okay, introduce yourself and then introduce your panel and your topic, and then we're anxious to hear.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Zach Penzone, and I'm the narrative lead for this project, and my partner is Iman, and she is the ordinance lead of this presentation. And we're talking about sustainable commercial landscape, and that's our model ordinance for Susquehanna Township. So just a roadmap of what I'll be going over is what is the problem? How does Susquehanna Township ordinances already address the problem? What have other municipalities have done? And then I just have a quick takeaway. So the main problem, overarching problem for what I found is there's a lack of sustainable landscaping practices in these commercial areas throughout the township. And this has led to 3 main issues: the dangers of clear cutting areas, invasive species, and the increase of stormwater. And the reason these problems are created is because there's no ordinance to directly address commercial landscape. There are other ordinances that have done or have touched on this issue. So Susquehanna Township currently has a street tree ordinance and a stormwater ordinance. The street tree just talks about the trees between the edge of the property and the street, which does implicitly affect commercial landscaping for those commercial owners that owns sidewalks. This would be affected. So it's very under-inclusive because it was only about maybe 0.1% of the land that they actually own at these commercial areas. Stormwater, we actually, this does impact commercial landscaping a lot, is because Susquehanna Township has a tax program where if you hit X amount of criteria, you have to pay less in your stormwater taxes. So it's a little bit under-inclusive, but it does more than the street trees. And we actually use this, Iman will talk more about it, to kind of help be one of our incentives during our ordinance. What have other municipalities have done? I have a couple I want to just highlight that we looked at throughout our project. Lancaster actually came to our class. It was really great to actually talk with them. And they have a urban forester. And throughout that, they have they're calling them urban forests. And throughout the streets of it and everything in Lancaster. And this just talks about what can be planted, how much can be planted. The city actually has a stormwater program there, and they've saved about 250 million gallons of contaminated water from entering Chesapeake. York County, they only had a model ordinance that they're still working on from what I was looking at it. This is a little bit more still on that plant side. What can be planted? What kind of bushes can be used? Really just trying to get at keeping the native environment there and eliminating invasive species being used. Montgomery County is a little bit further away from Harrisburg. This ordinance I thought was unique because the whole goal when I was reading it was sustainability, but that word you can't find in the ordinance whatsoever. They were really trying to talk about and address the topics we're talking about here tonight: stormwater, invasive species, clear cutting. And I thought it was a great ordinance, but nowhere in the ordinance did it say the word sustainable. And I just thought that was interesting when we looked at going a lot further away from Harrisburg is California. This ordinance, I think, has been around for a while when I was looking at it, because this is different than the other three and is geared on the actual landscaping of the property. It's not looking at what plants are being used. It's what is the actual design to mitigate or lessen the stormwater that's being emitted. And then just my little takeaway before Eline takes over half of the presentation, I just found this quote when I was looking through things. I thought it'd be fun, good transition, but also just something fun to think about throughout the night. Look after the land and the land will look after you. Destroy it and it will destroy you. With that, I'm going to turn it over to my partner, Eline.
Good afternoon, everybody. I hope everybody can hear me all right. So as far as the roadmap, like Zach was saying, I am the lead on the ordinance that we drafted for sustainable commercial landscaping. For tonight's roadmap, I'm first going to talk about the purpose of the ordinance. I'm going to mention its administrative and procedural provisions. We're going to go into some of the requirements that the ordinance provides, its enforcement and appeals process.
Oh,
Sorry,
thanks. You're up, buddy. What's up, Brian's way? Sorry, Brian.
That's all right.
sorry, Lance.
I didn't even get. It's doing this.
All right, let's try that again.
Okay, was it a sound thing or the PowerPoint?
It was a sound thing. It was a sound.
Okay, I'm guessing everyone can hear fine now. So I'll just finish up with the roadmap. We'll also talk about the role of the agency that's going to be the main administrator of the ordinance and the incentives that the ordinance brings. So the purpose of this ordinance, the reason that me and Zach drafted it, is to correctly regulate the way in which commercial buildings and areas use the green spaces located around and throughout their properties. We're just trying to make sure that any commercial property in the Susquehanna Township uses their green spaces in the most sustainable manner possible. So administratively and procedurally, who must comply with this ordinance? Any person, partnership, corporation, anyone that maintains a commercial property with any form of landscaping located around it must comply to this ordinance if they're in the Susquehanna Township. As far as administrability, any agency, the agency that's determined by the township may administer this ordinance. So our ordinance defines agency really loosely. It's up to the discretion and the resources of the township, whether an agency is a person or an entire actual agency made up of multiple people. So these are a few of the requirements that our ordinance provides. So first is the buffer zone. Since this is about sustainable commercial landscaping, we want to make sure that the commercial area has some type of preservation system going on. So we're asking that, we're requiring that commercial property owners leave at least 75% of the surrounding landscape untouched. And that's just to make sure that the natural wildlife, the native flora, all the things that were there before construction started remains. And this applies to existing and future commercial landscapes. We're also requiring the removal of invasive species up to no less than 75% of all invasive species should be removed throughout the landscape of the commercial property. We're asking that commercial business owners and property owners submit a landscaping plan. That landscaping plan is to be approved and submitted to the agency, and it should be submitted prior to construction. This is just to make sure that we're not creating more problems, that the new buildings that are coming up will adhere to this ordinance, and that they're going to be practicing sustainability. And that's also our reasoning behind the special permit for clear cutting requirement. Anyone that wishes to clear cut, whether it's a portion or their entire landscape, they must have a special permit for it. So since we have a lot of requirements, we also need to have some enforceability, and also we made sure that there are some exemptions and appeal processes for citizens that may have a little bit of trouble following the ordinance or adhering to it, especially existing commercial properties. So enforcement wise, our main civil penalty is fines. And we also do have a provision that allows the township to kind of put its own violations on repeat offenders that fines aren't working for. As far as exemptions and appeals, if an existing commercial property is having difficulties adhering to the ordinance, they may file for an exemption, and fines may also be appealed within 10 days of issuance. So the agency is going to be the main overseer of this ordinance. It's also going to be the main entity responsible for administration and execution of the ordinance. So the agency, it has a big role. And for that, it's going to have kind of a hand-in-hand relationship with the township. It's going to work under the township and to the discretion of the township. So the township is kind of going to be the boss of the agency and kind of someone that they can refer to if any problems come up. I also included a few of the responsibilities and roles that we put for the agency to have. Those include reviewing and ruling on appeals to be exempt from this ordinance, reviewing and ruling on permit requests, the special clear cutting permits that we mentioned earlier, they're going to be reviewing and ruling on those, issuing fines to people, and reviewing appeals for fines as well. So as far as the incentives, the commercial businesses that engage in the qualified stormwater management tools listed in our ordinance, or if they construct a buffer zone with at least 80% of the native species found that are already registered to the township, they can get a special grant for their business. And this is kind of something to offset all of those requirements, just to let the community and property owners know that we're working with them too. And for grant applicants to make their application stronger, since grant funds will be limited, and those the amount of the funds will be up to the discretion of the township as well. These are some sustainable best practices grant applicants can follow to make that grant application stronger. And thank you all so much for being here tonight. We are ready for questions now.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. What we're going to do, how we're going to kind of handle our questions tonight. A lot of the topics have been working with some people or the groups who are kind of ahead of the most interested in it. So we're going to kind of let them start the questioning, and if we have some more time above them, then we'll go around the rest of the panel. So in this case, the sustainable commercial landscaping was something that Susquehanna was interested in. So at this point, we kind of defer to Betsy at first to ask some questions of you.
So I guess my first question is, what made you decide to use the word tax as opposed to a fee when you were coming up with the stormwater amount?
Oh, sorry.
Uh,
So
You mentioned
What I-
tax, and then it was also in the document. So.
okay, I was gonna say, I thought we used the term fee, like just like and maybe that's just a fault on ours when we were writing it, but I was under, when we did write it, I thought we used the term fee because, you know, it's a local ordinance, just like a parking fine, anything like that, like a fine or a fee. That,
Well, yeah, so I think there just needs to be some clarification on that, as anyone who's worked with stormwater knows, we don't call it a tax.
Oh.
So
so
I
thought you were
would
talking
make
about
sure that that's clarified. It's a
Sorry,
utility-
Betsy.
No,
What,
that's okay.
at what, where exactly in the narrative or in the ordinance writing?
Well, I think it was in your presentation.
Yes, I called the stormwater a tax, and that was just my interpretation of reading it, like, so that's my fault.
Yeah, and I'll forward my comments to
Thank you.
the professor so he can get them out to you where it specifically says tax. But just because the way that the township is set up, it's a utility fee. So the fee's not what we would like punish people with. It's not that type of fee. It's a fee just like you would pay for your sewer or your water.
Okay.
So, and there's just very different implications when there's a tax versus a fee. So that was just my first question. And then at one point you talked about the, I think it was like $6.10 For,
The stormwater incentive, the $6.
Yeah.
Yeah.
is that, where did you like determine that number? Or what made you like think of that number? And I apologize, I don't have it.
Oh, no, you're fine. I believe I'm the one who came up with that number because it was a part of the grant program for the ordinance. And I know that I got it from a county in Pennsylvania. That was their stormwater tax incentive program number. And it went based on the square feet of the commercial properties sizes in the township.
Gotcha. So we would like you to look at what our fee is and how we do incentives, as opposed to what somebody else is doing, since this is specifically for Susquehanna Township. We don't grant reductions for more than 30% of the fee. So if you want to like look at changing that, that would probably be helpful.
Absolutely.
Those are like my big
Section
ones.
301 is where 615 is
And that's where
mentioned.
it says tax too, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Can you tell the two local officials here are very sensitive to the words taxes and fees?
Yes, the
Very,
vernacular.
very different in how our residents listen to those two words.
Yes.
And that was just my fault for, misinterpreting, but I'm grateful they have that now, so we fix that for our final.
No,
Yeah,
that was
that's what
good.
this is all for.
Yep, yeah, just. Some of the definitions that you have, the impenetrable surfaces, is there a reason that you like chose some of these definitions? Because they seem a little different than what would typically be in either a stormwater ordinance or a zoning ordinance.
So, for the impenetrable surfaces, I took that from looking at other ordinances and things like that, because that's what they, in the equation of what they're looking at for stormwater, what
Okay.
could be entered into the ground. I just put in the definition in case, because I'm gonna be
Yeah,
honest,
so-
I didn't know what it was until I looked it up.
So generally, we go by impervious surface for that. I think it's what
Okay.
you're referencing is the same thing. But when you're looking at these ordinances, especially if you're working with a township, like try to incorporate the ordinances that they are, like the definitions that they already use. So there's consistency throughout.
And also that is something that Dernbach talked to us about. That was one of our things that we had to learn from drafting this ordinance for the first time. A lot of the definitions that we had, they were kind of general, like that you would already find in a dictionary. So a lot of them will be replaced with things that are more so special terms.
Great, okay, thanks. Those are all the questions.
Okay, lightning round, Robert. Good question.
Yes, I admire your idea about having what did you call it, a plan for clear cutting?
The permit.
As a permit for that, would you allow that, or maybe like a selective harvesting before the development? So they take away all the trees, that kind of creates all the problems.
So I think when Iman and I were really doing this project, we were lucky to look behind us. And that's kind of like where we were looking at with the clear cutting, trying to limit it as much as possible. We understand you have to go in to get the machinery and stuff in there, but too many times, especially like behind school here, they just cleared more than they absolutely needed to. So I think the permit would be, because we know it's necessary, or if there's a legitimate reason, they could fill out the permit and it can either be approved or denied by that.
Good answer. Thank you.
I had a question about under appeals. And it was under agency, board, council, and number 2. If the agency or board council cannot reach a majority decision, then the person, partnership, or corporation will not be exempt from adhering to this ordinance. It's kind of like opposite of what we see in zoning issues, where if the council or board can't make a decision, then it's granted to the applicant. I think
Okay.
we're punishing the applicant if the board can't make a decision on something that they wrote.
So from my understanding, what we were thinking about writing it is the ordinance is saying you can't do this. So if there's not a majority saying you can, then it would go back to the ordinance saying no. But I can understand, we should flip that.
That's my
Yeah.
opinion, and
I just even try to explain it. I see how it's a little bit backwards, so.
that's okay.
Thank you.
Okay, all right. I'm not gonna add any more time. I appreciate you your work and your efforts, and we thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good job.
Thank you, guys.
Okay, so next we have personal delivery devices. Andrew Miller and Pace Brown.
Everybody's looking at
Just to be clear, to everybody, Lindsay's timing.
Gotcha. All right, good evening. My name is Pace Brown, and along with my partner, Andrew Miller, we're going to be speaking about personal delivery devices tonight. And one of the first things I want to bring up is Senate Bill 1199. All right, and that was created for the purpose of the backdrop of the pandemic and looking at all right, I'm gonna skip that word, but basically new technology, all right, to assist people during the pandemic. And so one of the things they came up with specifically was with personal delivery devices. And the personal delivery devices actually went into effect in January 30th of 2021. It went under in Pennsylvania under the Act 106 of 2020. And that actual bill, what it did set limitations on the size, on the shape, on the speed, and you know, a few other things such as how it's going to be utilized on the sidewalks, on the shoulders of roadways, and then other insurance requirements. However, it did not fully go into details of how it's going to be actually handled in different municipalities. And that's the purpose of why you would need an ordinance. Specifically, one of the key elements is such as zoning. And what I mean by that is, for example, as you see one of the delivery devices on the screen, you do have some that would require a thing that's called a hive. What a hive is think of, I would say like a giant container, kind of ones like you see at Walmart, those type of containers, but a container will be utilized to actually house the equipment for the personal delivery devices. And I bring up the whole zoning aspect of it is because now this would have to be placed in residential areas. And so we have to take a look at the requirements such as how big the plot of land is going to be, how big the shape of the actual hive would be, the aesthetics, because we don't want possible land value to go down because this is in a residential area. And so we'll be looking at that. Another issue that comes up is the time frame of the operation. And what I mean by that is right now under Senate Bill 1199, it's from dusk till dawn. But what does that actually mean? Because we have differences, obviously in the summer to fall, when you have these time changes, then you also have to look at also such as when you have in the morning and in the evening of rush hour. There needs to actually be specific timeframes of when this can be in operation, so there will be no confusion. And then lastly, one of the things that I would like to bring up is the area of operation. Again, we have to look at sidewalks. Is the area that's going to be utilized in the sidewalks is big enough? Because remember, we have pedestrians that are also supposed to walk along with these devices supposed to operate. Also, is there going to be enough traffic? And so one of the examples that probably not in what you're reading, but is from the city of Pittsburgh. What the city of Pittsburgh did, they did a pilot program. Now under the bill 1199, what it allows, it has a phase 1 and it has a phase 2. Phase 1, it requires that an operator be within 30 feet. Phase 2, the operator being in 30 feet is no longer required. In the pilot program, they what they did was they got with a company, a smaller company that was willing to work with them and work with a municipality. And they chose a specific municipality based on the financial means within the area, based on the gender, based on the age,
based on small businesses that'll be willing to actually utilize personal delivery devices. And they did that in phase 1. And the whole purpose was data collection, because now they'd be able to see such as accidents that you possibly have, any type of incidents that you would have, and also the interaction with the community. If I did not mention, which I did not, during that time frame, they'll be doing kind of an informational blitz within that community to let everyone know what a personal delivery device is and how it can impact them. And obviously, the benefits that come from that is not only that a lot of these devices are battery operated, which cuts back on the carbon dioxide within that community, but again, you also have, in case there are any other issues, you have a way to still get needed medication, needed resources to the community. Thank you. And now I'll be introducing Mr. Andrew Miller.
All right, thank you, Pace. Good evening, everyone. My name is Andrew Miller, and I'll be giving the ordinance portion of this presentation about personal delivery devices. You just heard from my partner, Pace Brown, who gave the narrative portion. So the first thing is purpose. Purpose of this ordinance is to regulate the operation of personal delivery devices by providing specific guidelines that are not regulated by PennDOT. PennDOT is the entity that regulates PDDs in Pennsylvania. This ordinance is meant to meet the increasing popularity of personal delivery devices with an applicable and fair law. The ordinance promotes and protects the safety as well as the general welfare of persons affected by the use of PDDs. So next is definitions. Some important definitions for this ordinance are residential architectural design in low volume area. Residential architectural design is conforming to the residential floor plan, style and facade of storage hives. So if it is a commercial, then the storage hives don't need to conform to the residential architectural design. And then low volume area is if the population of the area is less than 2,000 people, or it's a time frame that it does not have a lot of residential congestion in the area. Next is requirements. So what are the main elements required for this ordinance? We have size, speed, storage hives, a time frame of use and fees. So size. I'm sorry. Size, so PDDs should not be more than 200 pounds. So PennDOT has a weight limit of 550 pounds, which we think is, pretty excessive. Speed, PDDs should not travel more than 3 miles per hour, which is the average speed that a pedestrian walks, and PDDs are considered pedestrians. So PennDOT has a speed limit of 25 miles per hour, which again, we think is a little excessive. Human operator must remain within 30 feet of the PDD and may not use more than one PDD at the same time. Storage hives, they must conform to residential architectural design, which was defined earlier. Time frame of use, PDDs may not be operated during daylight and dusk and high volume timeframes. And then fee, there's an annual fee which is required, which includes a parking spot. Next is incentives. So we have incentives for use in less congested area, incentives for preferential hiring, and incentives for utilization of gas or non-solar or non-gas combustion. So incentives for use in less traffic area, PDDs that are operating in low volume areas will receive a lower annual fee. Preferential hiring incentives, businesses or corporations that will hire employees from local areas will receive a lower fee as well. Utilization of solar or non-gas combustion will result in a tax break. The tax break amounts will be designated by the township. If the PDD utilizes solar energy, property taxes will decrease by a set amount, which is designated by the township as well. Next, we have prohibitions. We have time, zoning, parking, and permits. For time, it is unlawful to operate a PDD during a high volume time frame, which is a time frame that is the volume of residential congestion in the area, which is high. Zoning, which is unlawful for a PDD stored in a residential area to operate or be stored outside the permitted residential area. And then parking, it is unlawful to park PDD in off-street parking unless there's an exception applies. And you can't block traffic as well. And then permit, it's unlawful to operate a PDD without a permit. Exceptions are next. And for exceptions, we have zoning and parking. So for zoning, PDDs can be stored in commercial area if there's adequate square footage, if there's adequate off-street parking, and if the operator receives a commercial permit. For parking, it is unlawful to park in off-street parking unless the operator pays an additional yearly fee. And then next is administrative requirements. The ordinance will apply to all persons, businesses, or corporations applying to use personal delivery devices within the township. And a zoning board will be appointed and will conduct hearings within 45 days of the regulation. And then finally, at the beginning of this presentation, the PACE spoke about the problem. And we think this ordinance addresses and solves this problem. Thank you. We will take any questions at this time now.
This is partly a tri-county one, even though it's but is there any questions initially from anybody on the panel that'd like to ask?
I have two and maybe I missed it. Where are these PDs allowed to go? Like, where can they travel? Do they travel in the street?
They can
Not
they can travel along the side of the street. So if like, they're not in the street,
Okay, so
but
like the shoulder.
shoulder, they can travel on the shoulder, they can travel on the sidewalk. And they are looked at as pedestrians as well.
So I think they define it as the berm. So I'm not sure what a berm is, but they're allowed to travel on berms, which is, I think, on the side of the roads. So they're not
Yeah.
actually on the roads from my understanding. But it's primarily the sidewalks that we're concerned about for the most part.
In that background photo that you had on your other ones, was the Hive the thing sitting in the street and all the delivery devices were?
No,
Oh, okay.
That's
No,
the
the-
actual delivery device.
right,
Oh,
that's
okay.
where we're saying it can't be parked there unless it has a permit or unless it's in a especially special particular parking spot for it. The Hive is what actually the actual devices will be in. And
The Hive is the bigger vehicle?
no,
No,
the Hive
it's
is a
a storage
storage
unit.
device. The
Okay.
Hive is the storage device. So the only companies that would actually have a Hive would be high volume companies, because you'll have a lot of actual devices out at one time. When I was speaking about the pilot earlier, they were using a smaller company, so they only, in the test phase, in phase one, they only had 10 actual delivery devices out. So there was no need for an actual Hive.
What will you deliver with these?
You can deliver pizza, you can deliver medication, basically different types of food, but again, it'll be based on the size of the actual delivery device. Like we're saying, up to 200 pounds in this particular ordinance. As you can see, this one is about that size, but depending on the dimensions, it can actually hold like a small pizza, possibly 2 small pizzas or 3 small pizzas in it. And I'm thinking especially for like medication for the elderly that are not able to come out, especially when we look at nights like this. Something that can actually go and deliver the medication during the actual working hours.
My concern was that you have to have an operator, it has to be within 30 feet of the machine. I would think the operator would be easier delivered than trying to control machine and watching all that stuff.
Right, well, that's only in phase one. Phase
Okay,
one is
okay.
the only time
Okay,
an
thank you.
operator is required.
I
Once,
misunderstood that.
right, once you hit in phase two, that's when it's more autonomous. That's when the operator can actually be in their vehicle and operating all of the actual devices that are out.
Okay, sorry, I misunderstood that.
Just for more clarification, sorry. So the yellow thing that's on the road, that's the size of a car, is storage for the little like dog-like robots.
No, that is
No,
that is the actual vehicle that's taking them. So for instance, there's not a lot of delivery devices. So this actual vehicle houses them, and like the company sits there and takes them away.
It's a vehicle. Okay,
Correct.
so that wouldn't have different standards than any other vehicle operating. All right, I don't know enough about these. to-
No,
To ask you a question.
Yeah, kind of in time type thing. It's kind of I won't talk about details, but you had a difficult topic because as you can see from the questions tonight, we don't know what you're talking about. So it's hard, we're a bunch of regulators up here and we're trying to figure out working with different municipalities on what to regulate, but we don't know what you're even doing. Like our questions are, is that a thing that goes out and these little droids come flying out like it's an R2D2s running all over the neighborhood, or is it?
Yes, yes and no.
Yeah,
See,
okay.
yes and no.
See that? Well, or, again, the other thing you always hear about is the drones, are they popping out of a machine? So I guess in some ways, your ordinance writing, you had it stacked against you in this case, because this is something that is very hard to get everybody's mind around. I think what you did pretty well is one of the basis of an ordinance. So whenever you're dealing with regulating is who, where, when, what time, where can you do it, who's going to pay the fine, who's going to do the permit. I think a lot of that stuff you've got here. It's just, I think whenever we start building, when we know what a mall is, we know how to regulate malls, or whenever we start talking about warehouses, everybody knows what warehouses are. I think what you had the problem with is it's so out there. It's so you're trying to regulate the future. Can you imagine the people who were trying to regulate the internet before it even got started? And I think that's where the thing. So I think in a lot of cases, if you start seeing our comments that come in, it's like, well, what about this? I think that's part of our questions on something. So you really had us and kind of a tougher assignment than most, I think, because it's something that I think that's, we're needy.
Right, and that's why I said, I brought up the city of Pittsburgh only because they literally got a small company and used it as a pilot.
Right.
To push kind of the whole thing of, we're trying to figure this out. And so they used that whole phase one as a data collection. And then when they went into phase two, it just multiplied on top of the data they already had. And that was more so to get a grip. Hey, where should we actually allow this? What type of, specific ordinances for specific places do we want to look at? And that's the only way something like that can come about is literally through a pilot program, because things you're going to run into is like, this is a nice large sidewalk, but you do have some municipalities in some areas, the sidewalk is very narrow.
Right.
So these are things that have to be taken into consideration in terms of when you're saying, okay, hey, it's here, someone can apply for an application, but are we ready? Did we do enough research? Did we get enough information to make actual informed decisions on what we need in this ordinance? And to me, the only way to do that is through a pilot program and to find a company that's willing to work with the municipality, get the information out and to help collect the data.
All right, so I
Thank
think we're probably over our limit there. So
Yeah.
thank you very much.
you.
Appreciate it
That's a
and
great
help us
Good job.
informing it.
Good job, gentlemen.
Thank you. Okay, I think next we have a sustainable residential landscape.
Scattering,
Are you down there waving? I can't see her whenever it's time. How does it work?
Well, we should, we can.
All right.
She holds up the.
Yeah.
You need to
know if
She
she'll tell you.
holds up the paper.
If you need to crumble up something and throw it down at this way, go ahead and I'm sure it'll. No, that's fine. All right.
Yeah, but we're government, so.
Yeah, we're-
we
we're
get- So we get treated.
It comes with the business. All right, so are you ready?
Are
Go
we
ahead.
waiting for anyone?
No, I think we can
Yeah, I think he had to go out for a minute, so.
go ahead.
Okay, we're just gonna
start.
start. Okay. Well, our presentation is on sustainable residential landscaping. I'm Jules, I'm the narrative lead, and this is Kayla, she's the ordinance lead. So first, I wanted to address the challenges facing Susquehanna Township. First, these are some pests that are currently very challenging to deal with in the township. Lantern flies are a particular challenge. They're new to the area. The PA Department of Agriculture issued an order of quarantine a few years ago, preventing their spread to new areas within Pennsylvania. And although they're not harmful to humans or buildings, they are harmful to plants. They feed on the sap of plants and they ultimately kill the plant. Stink bugs are, as the lanternfly of the 90s, they are also native to East Asia, and they also feed on valuable crops, which makes them unmarketable. Few pesticides can get rid of them, but they are repelled by odoriferous plants. Another problem facing Susquehanna Township is a decreasing pollinator population. I listed some examples of pollinators, and pollinators are very important because without them, all ecosystems would perish. Almost 80% of food plants, medicinal plants, and plant-based dyes rely on them. Another challenge is noxious weeds. A noxious weed is defined as any plant that causes damage to crops, livestock, or environmental interests. There are 3 classes of noxious weeds based on their rate of spread and how easy it is to get rid of. Class A is geographically limited to one area and it can be eradicated. Class B is widely established and cannot easily be eradicated. And Class C is either not known to exist in Pennsylvania, but pose a threat if introduced, or listed on the federal noxious weed list. Another challenge facing Susquehanna Township is drought. Dauphin County is currently on drought watch by the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection. There is a 5-category system in which a lack of drought does not fall into any of these categories. Over the past 20 years, Susquehanna Township has been in and out of the D0 category, sometimes raising to D1 or D2, rarely raising to D3, and Pennsylvania has never experienced a D4 drought. The last challenge is a lack of street tree diversity. This is unsafe, for example, when a certain species is afflicted by a disease or insect. That species could disappear, leaving residents with the burden to replace the trees. Street trees can also grow too big and grow into power lines and damage property in the surrounding areas. Susquehanna Township needs a new ordinance for these problems because the current ordinance is silent on almost all of these issues. There is a shade tree commission which can inspect and issue citations, but the residents are required to maintain and replace all vegetation. The township unfortunately does not have much control over this. Almost half of the commission's approved street trees are not native to this region, but to East Asia. Native plants are important for native wildlife and pollinators to thrive. They're also more likely to survive in this environment. Other municipalities have addressed this problem in various ways, such as native plants and lawn replacement. Chester County has planting requirements around the home, including native trees and shrubs. West Norriton is transitioning at least 50% of residential properties to contain 20% native plants. This was also later adopted by Schuylkill Township and Lower Makefield Township, Pennsylvania. Westchester Borough requires planting of diverse street trees and restricts topsoil removal. Ferguson Township also recognizes a tree protection zone, which is the area in between the tree trunk and the canopy, where the canopy ends. Many residents in these townships and counties are turning to clover to complete their goals. Running buffalo clover is a clover that's native to Pennsylvania and requires much less water than grass and is cheaper to plant. Another solution is vegetative buffers, which is a space of vegetation that provides separation in between 2 different land use areas. In Ferguson Township, 60% of vegetation needs to be native plants, and landowners must destroy noxious weeds. They also increase their vegetation height limit from 6 to 8 inches, which is good because height limits prevent the growth of wildflower gardens and rain gardens. Another way is financial incentives, enforcement, and penalties. Incentive programs are, for example, in Ferguson Township, credits are issued to offset planting requirements. There's a bigger credit issued for the more tree canopy that exists and greater trunk diameter. In Westchester Borough, you can get a credit against storm protection fees, stormwater facilities, and it's similar to a retention basin, the stormwater facility that you would plant. The incentives programs allow residents to choose whether or not to put the effort into participating and be rewarded for their making their conscious and sustainable decisions. Also, new construction requirements. In Lower Makefield Township, for example, all new construction must have a comprehensive landscaping plan to conserve the natural landscape. New plantings must be native plants, and in Westchester Borough, a violation will result in a fine of $500 unless there was a good faith basis for violating whatever penalty. In Ferguson Township, new housing developments must plant vegetative buffers between curbs and right-of-way lines. And in general, if ordinances are violated, there will be penalties that follow.
All right. So to address the issues that Jules' narrative discussed, we decided to draft the residential landscaping ordinance for Susquehanna Township in order to provide some solutions. So this is a roadmap that my ordinance takes. First, we start with the purpose, and that's really to address everything she said in her narrative. And then the definitions are pretty lengthy, and they include list of acceptable plants. And then the substantive chapters include landscaping provisions, street tree provisions, existing sites, new construction, and then an administration chapter. So the landscaping provision details requirements for meadows, native plants, and removal of invasive species, lawn alternatives, and vegetative buffers. So in the ordinance, a meadow has to have native plants that are listed in the definition, and it has to have 2 grass species and 4 flower species to be considered a meadow in this ordinance. This section encourages native plants to be planted by landowners and the removal of invasive species by landowners. And that's to promote biodiversity and repel pests. Lawn alternatives, again, also have a list, and it's really just clovers, and we want to try to be less resource intensive. So we're encouraging people to at least mix their grass with lawn alternatives or switch completely to lawn alternatives. Vegetative buffers is to help with runoff that landowners may face, and they can be incentivized to install one with a stormwater fee deduction. In this section, the Planning Commission is in charge of approving the landscaping plans, and a landowner will submit that with graphic depictions, number of plants, names of plants, and the use for each plant. So is it being used for a meadow, vegetative buffer? Again, that's approved by the Planning Commission. So then street trees, it's really any public street, highway, or tree lawns. This section is administered and enforced by the Shade Tree Commission, and it details branching heights, Kepler, root ball standards, and planting procedures of the trees. Existing buildings is really more of an incentive than a penalty. We know that Susquehanna Township is a established neighborhood with established lawns and gardens. And I know that if this was passed, my grandma wouldn't want to change her lawn. So we're using it more as an encouragement. But landowners are responsible to maintain, replace street trees, and to maintain and replace their landscaping standards. New construction, we implemented stricter requirements, and this includes new construction that's approved entirely from the ground up, or existing construction that requires a permit through the township. They're required to have a vegetative buffer, and their lawn has to be mixed with lawn replacement and turf. And we're asking that at least 50% of the species in their lawn is native. So the administration section includes a right for entry, so the township can inspect. If you're applying for the stormwater credit, they can inspect to make sure you're doing everything correctly to get these, or a penalty if you're violating them, especially for new construction. Landscaping plan appeals is also in the section, and then penalties and fines for non-compliance, which we're getting from the SALDO draft that Susquehanna Township gave us.
We would like to open the floor for questions.
Unlike delivery devices, I think we know trees. So Betsy, would you like to get into the weeds?
I will. Thanks, Jerry. I would love to. First, I just want to commend you on all the effort you guys put into this. I know you worked with us really well in trying to understand the situations that we're facing and kind of how to deal with them. One of the questions I have is, can you go into a little bit more detail on the height restrictions that I think you mentioned it in your presentation, but I know there's some
For
also.
the
in
trees?
For like the meadows.
For vegetation growth, there are height restrictions in vegetative buffers based on different types of plants and how tall they can be, or how tall they need to be to plant them. And I, in my research, discovered that these height limits limit your ability to grow wildflower gardens and pollinator gardens, rain gardens, stormwater facilities,
Okay, so you're talking about like when we have regular height limits
Right.
with like,
And then
like with grass and.
Right,
and
so
weeds.
after our follow-up conversation,
Mhm.
I did change the draft for it to be meadows can only reach a maximum height of 4.5 feet.
Yeah, so increasing those height limits, because there still can be a height limit, and But increasing it does help these gardens to be able to grow.
And most ordinances had 4 feet, but I figure I would give the landowner a little bit leeway. So if it's like a little bit over 4 feet, I figured 4.5 was sufficient.
Think I know where you were going with that, Betsy.
Oh, yeah.
Property maintenance complaints. Oh, they got weeds that are 4
And-
feet high.
And our stormwater coordinator in our office and our property maintenance inspector often have large discussions on what the heights should be of something when we're trying to improve meadows and also regulate, grass from growing too
For
high.
this, we imagine that the height limits would apply to sections that are specifically for meadows, vegetative buffers, not necessarily your average turf grass.
And my other question is, what do you think is going to be the most challenging thing for us to implement through this ordinance?
I think it's that it's an established township. So people aren't gonna like this, but that's why we're trying to make it more of an incentive program, especially for existing. Do you
Yeah,
have
I
any
think-
challenges?
Well, I think the biggest challenge I saw was the street trees and how expensive they can be in the damage that they cause and in the replacement costs, and how because of the limited resources in the township, it falls onto the residential landowners. And I think that's, a problem that we can't necessarily solve in our ordinance, but
Thank you.
yeah.
Others? Ed?
No, I think I know the intention. But I think one of the big issues, and it kind of came up, is the neighbors looking at somebody's property.
Mm.
And I spent a good couple of days in court one time over a similar issue when the judge ruled that the plants that the woman ate were permitted because they were medical purposes. And it shot the hell out of our ordinances on high grass and weeds. So it can be a real battle, and it will be at some point.
Is,
Yeah.
so is it, did I understand correctly, a function of the ordinance is to help incentivize folks, residential properties in the township to maybe move away from just having all grass lawns and do,
Yeah.
native grass, native meadow plantings or landscape bushes or even trees? So is
Yeah,
it-
even if it's just a mix of turf, like one step in the sustainable direction, we take as a win.
So like, for example, if you have a regular grass lawn that you mow weekly and you add a bit of clover to it, clover you'd have to replant maybe every 2 to 3 years, but it would help the surrounding grass grow because clover is a legume rather than a grass. So its roots are able to extend deeper into the surface of the soil, therefore collecting more water, and it releases nitrogen into the soil as well. Nitrogen fixation helps the plants around it. The shade from the leaves of the clover also helps keep the soil cool and retain water, and therefore it's very drought resistant and it can save the landowners money. It also doesn't grow as high as grass. It tops off at about 4 to 8 inches, so you don't have to mow it as often. There's a lot of benefits to it.
That's the best part about it. I've heard all night.
I know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That showed me on the ordinance.
Oh, your
right
lawn
there.
less,
Yeah.
yeah.
I already have clover in my lawn and it's doing a good job of taking over the grass anyway. So just let it do its thing.
Just, yeah, well, almost, but I'll tell one story. There was a situation where we had 20 years ago where one of these, we all have our war stories. There was one resident who was trying to do something like you have, but again, he was getting violation notices and everything. And he came to the argument saying these are wildflowers, these are whatever, and then went to the court and everything else. So at the end of the day, we had people go out there with little sticks with little, those surveying things to mark it. He mowed around. So the intent was if the intent of the neighbors was to try and enforce the rules to make this guy's lawn look nice, it didn't work. Nobody won in the end. So something like this is something that possibly could be utilized and very helpful to a number of communities. And again, we appreciate your work. And again, I think you did a very nice job.
For new developments, which is maybe a little bit more difficult in Susquehanna and some of our other
Oh,
communities.
they keep coming.
Yeah, I see this would be a good incentive program for a new development where you didn't already have lawns planted and all that. I really see something like this would be a
Yeah.
benefit for that type of a program.
And I
That's
think it's a
awesome.
lot of it too is just the mental aspect of trying to get everyone away from that. the garden
Yeah, I
of
totally
the
agree.
lawn, and everybody looking like the outfield at Wrigley Field or something like that, so.
The new construction aspect is where we would hope to have the most enforcement, just because we can't have much control over the existing residences, as Kayla has stated, but when it comes to the new developments, you can regulate those a bit more.
All right, well, thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
and
Thank
we'll-
you.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
one
Appreciate it.
suggestion for the township, maybe you can give residents who follow the program and the incentives to put up a sign in their, on the street in their front yard, so their neighbors know that it's been certified by the township.
Yeah, everyone loves a little plaque, you know? Everyone loves that. That's a good idea.
In charge of grass and weeds now.
Thanks.
Thank you.
I already have.
Okay,
I like that idea, Robert.
I have a suggestion. That is, you take a 5-minute break after their presentation.
Okay.
Photographs and that sort of thing, because otherwise we're going to get past 8 o'clock. And we're going to lose people.
There's another, like, one of the other environmental groups has a.
Ready?
So my name is John Evanina. This is my partner Destiny Duncan. We had the topic of warehouses for Swatara Township. And so what in the world could be the problem with warehouses? That was the first thing that came to my mind. After we looked into it, there's a lot of problems with warehouses. Number one, they have a large footprint. They take up a big plot of land. The increased traffic, employees, deliveries in, deliveries out, noise, again, probably, from the traffic, equipment running in there. And then they use a lot of power. So big open building, lots of power to heat it in the winter, lots of power to cool it in the summer. And then also, if the warehouse uses refrigeration, that just draws a lot of power constantly. So our client was Swatara Township. They currently have about 7 or 8 warehouses, and they recently denied a permit for a warehouse. So Swatara Township's main concerns were the location of the warehouses, impacts on the environment, and the road network, and their compatibility with nearby residences. So we took a look around to see what other municipalities were doing. We found Windsor Township. I think they're in York County. They had an ordinance, but it was real vague. It basically said, keep the environmental impacts within acceptable levels, which, whatever those are. Then we also found Moore Township. They were primarily concerned with like nuisances, though, not too much with the sustainability aspect. In further research, we found the city of Fontana in California. They had a ordinance which was a lot more comprehensive, that addressed a lot of issues, buffer zones, landscaping. I don't know if it'd be so much of a concern in Pennsylvania, but they required that their landscaping be drought resistant, which I thought was interesting, but in California, it must be necessary. They had to have 35% shade cover, which was similar to what Lancaster City was doing. They have an urban forester that takes a look at all their trees and manages their shade cover. They also had idling restrictions, and then they addressed some other sustainability issues like solar panels. We thought this was interesting because the ease of implementing. When we first started, we thought that it would be really important to have this be very easily implemented for warehouses that were already in place. But I think that we're going to focus more now on new construction. But it would be, I guess, convenient if it ever wanted to make previous warehouses comply with it. No major structural changes to the warehouse. Simple things like policies. They require a policy of recycling be in place, and idling restrictions. The enforcement that the city of Fontana used was they kind of focused a lot on having the community get involved. Their ordinance actually requires signage nearby with a phone number to a person that is managing the warehouse for citizens to make complaints. So we're really mostly working out that city of Fontana ordinance because it would seem to address a lot of the issues that Swatara Township was concerned with. And we always thought it was good to try and get the community involved. So now I'm going to turn it over to Destiny.
So as John said, I'm going to talk about our ordinance part. We worked on the warehouse ordinance for Swatara Township. And the big question facing us was, can ordinances make warehouses more sustainable and improve their impact? And our overall conclusion in the end is yes, they can. So as he mentioned, the township have four main interests: the location, environment, the traffic patterns, and compatibility with residential areas. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about each area and a few things we've included in our provision. So the first is location. It's going to be, warehouses are going to be permitted in the M through L and M through G district in the township. That's their light and general manufacturing district. It's going to be permitted as a conditional use. It kind of coincides with the idea of urban warehousing, where you're bringing warehouses to urban areas to respond to the demand from consumers to want the product fast while also being able to economically profit. Next is the environment. This was very big for our client. The Swatara Township actually has a land plan known as the Swatara Rising of 2025, in which they're trying to make the township a place premier for living, but also for businesses to thrive. So one of the things they need to do in order to do that is to protect the environment. So a major thing we had to focus on was preserving the natural land. So there's a provision within our ordinance that doesn't allow warehouses to be located anywhere where agricultural prime soil would be, where woodlands would be, or the destruction of trees. The next would be alternative energy. As John had mentioned, warehouses have a large carbon footprint. So we included provisions within the ordinance, such as requiring LED lighting or having the warehouse built at the end of construction that solar panels could be placed on top, or as an alternative reflective coating on the roofing, as well as including buffer yards to also be another environment mitigation that would avoid any nuances such as odor, noise, or invasion of privacy. Next was the traffic patterns. As a part of the permit application, the applicant is required to conduct a traffic study, and we want the traffic study to show that you can abide by some of the provisions included in the ordinance, such as collector and arterial roadway accessibility, which would ensure there's minor roads that lead to major roads so that the heavy diesel trucks aren't driving through the residential area. We also require driveway and internal drive aisle widths and lanes so that we can ensure the trucks can drive down the lanes and turn properly, as well as we included a provision of no idling and a system of mechanical scraper systems, which basically requires that the operator of the truck during the winter months drive under the scraper system to ensure that no snow or residue is left, to also limit any traffic disruptions. Lastly, it was the compatibility with the residential area. This was major because the last ordinance that the township had, the residents didn't feel as though they were protected. So we included provisions within the ordinance that didn't allow the warehouse to be located next to or around schools or residential districts, as well as provisions that prohibited the actions of the warehouse to protect the character of the surrounding neighborhoods, such as being mindful of their hours of operation, the noise, the dumping of hazardous waste, and any dangerous activities. And that would be the conclusion of our project. Any questions?
I didn't really think I was good with this sustainable land use.
I think you said like all the way up 81 is a pretty,
Oh, yeah.
It's
All the way
all
to
lot.
Allentown, Easton, yep.
yeah.
And all the way south down past Gettysburg too.
One question I had was, and I was concerned about, was that you talked about no trees being removed. And I found that a little bit harsh, I'll put it that way. Because I know, in my opinion, there's good trees and there's bad trees. There's trees of economic value because of their wood and size of that nature. There's other trees that are just a pain in the butt if you have to do anything with them. Is there a way in which that can be, or maybe you already thought about that, and I see you nodding your head as I'm saying that, so it must have
Yeah.
already come up.
Yeah, it did come up. So like you said, that is harsh. No trees, like, I mean, is that a tree? You know,
What's a tree?
so we were talking about, making it was a diameter, right? It was the tree's diameter
With-
was, we were gonna set up some more parameters so that it wasn't, so harsh, like you were saying.
Or maybe, you know, a forester can come in and designate the trees of economic value or of environmental value as opposed to invasive type trees and things of that nature. If they're-
What?
You took my question.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I did something wrong.
No, you took my question. I'm not trying to figure out what else to ask.
Do you want me to say something while you think?
No, I
Something like
haven't.
Ordering?
No, I
Okay.
haven't. I just had two comments for the mechanical scraper that you have outlined. I thought that was a great idea. It could also be used to remove invasive species like spotted lanternfly if they're cleaning it off. I don't know if you said, I think for your footnotes, Moore Township currently has that as a requirement. I know, especially with like, was it the chicken flu or whatever avian flu that's
Avian
going
flu.
around? Like they need to wash the vehicles whenever they're leaving a site. So, and then the other comment was just that for the recycling section, section 206, you could also add a requirement that they include their annual reporting to the township, if that's something they're required to do.
Thank you.
Yeah, I thought this was a nice job. Couple comments, and I think you may have seen them yet. Some of the things you have to watch out for is definitions for traffic for arterials and such, because it gets into the heavy. There might be other sections of the code that you have to watch out for how it's defined based upon traffic flow. There's one thing that I didn't understand what it was. Let's see, my note is under section 208. Adjacent sensitive receptor.
Yeah, we already had a comment. I think Professor Dernbach.
Okay.
We need to make that define that a little better.
Okay.
You know, what-
Is that a cranky neighbor? Is that-
Exactly, yeah. Yeah, we have to define that a little better for sure.
Okay, all right. No, I think it's a nice job. I think one of the things we're talking about is, taking these uses that are, that have come on and come so fast, and a lot of communities have not really had a chance to fine tune them to what everybody, it's changing our landscape of our development patterns, particularly here in our area because of we're connected to all the networks, the highway networks and everything. So this will be very good, and we appreciate you doing it, and thank you. And I sure.
I just have one more.
Yep, go ahead, Ed.
I know you placed in the ordinance such things as bicycle racks and things of that nature, charging stations for electric vehicles. One of the things I noticed that some of the warehouses did down around the Carlisle area was to place access for bus pickup or mass transit pickup. A bus stand, things of that nature where employees can come on and off it and rather than be out in the open. So maybe something like that be placed in there.
A bus shelter.
Thank you.
But yeah,
Oh, okay.
but someplace the bus can pull into and not have to come inside the,
Like a loading or drop off zone.
drop off zones, exactly.
Thank you.
Okay, all right. So I guess,
Well done.
thank you very much. All right, we're gonna take a 5-minute break.
5-minute break.
Did you want to do anything particular for pictures, Professor? How do you?
I think that maybe, sorry, Oh my God.
We're gonna bribe you out with sugar. Stay away.
First one's, pardon.
20 minutes to one.
One. I believe we are. My name is Max Flessner. I'm the narrative main author. This is my partner Molly Furlong. She is the ordinance main author, and we were working with Swatera Township on potentially updating some of their local zoning requirements to encapsulate electric vehicle service or supply equipment. So we're going to talk about what's called range anxiety, the problem, why the current ordinances are inadequate, some factors we thought through, and how other municipalities have begun to solve this problem. One very exciting thing about this topic is that over the course of the last year and a half, Congress has put about $5 billion into building out the EVSE network nationwide, and they've also added tax credits for people to buy electric vehicles. So this is going to be a problem that's going to be put into hyperdrive pretty quickly here. And one of the main reasons that it's important for townships to look at this is range anxiety. There was an article in the New York Times, I think today or yesterday morning, about a family who was doing a long haul trip across I-80, and they thought that they could get to Toledo, but she didn't factor in the weight of the luggage and that the air conditioner was going to be on, so they had to pull off earlier. There were only 4 charging stations in the town, but none of them were available, so they had to stay overnight and rent a car and continue on their way, and their electric vehicle stayed unused in the township in Ohio where they stopped because there weren't available EVSE. The problem with this is that governments all around the world are realizing that electric vehicles are the future and that we need to decarbonize. For instance, California has pledged to stop selling or to stop allowing the sale of combustion engine automobiles by I think 2030. Yeah, 2030. 2030. And so this being a matter of first impression for most townships, including Swatera, there aren't ordinances that would address this. So it does remain a problem, but there's a lot of opportunity to solve it because there's going to be a lot of money flowing down, and there's going to be a lot of capability for them to be able to work with both private companies and government resources to build this out. So the 2 biggest factors we found to think through when thinking through how to best put EVSE throughout a township or a political subdivision is to keep in mind grid load management and energy storage, and to quote unquote future-proof it. Grid load management is that you need, basically is exactly what it sounds like. You need to make sure that the grid can handle the capacity. This is all the more important with EVSE because when you're driving an electric vehicle, obviously most people's schedules, you are at home in the evenings and overnight, and you are at work in the mornings and throughout the day. So the capacity from a commercial to a residential grid is going to be almost exactly an opposite of one another. You're going to have peak home times in the evening, and you're going to have peak commercial times throughout the day. And in terms of future-proofing the EVSE, this is while there are great opportunities that we've discussed, this is a industry that's, I would say, very nascent. It's in its early stages. And what you don't want to do is build out this grid and then have to rebuild out this grid in 10 years as technology advances. Battery capacity is going to increase. The way that we power this grid is going to change, and you want to build in the capacity so that, as things develop, you have the ability to connect advances to the current EVSE, so you're not completely reinventing the wheel every couple of years as this goes. So the way that other municipalities have begun to think through this problem is permitted land use, make-ready standards, supply equipment standards, parking space design and location, and required parking capacity. Permitted land use is basically when you're thinking about where do you put what kind of charger. Some municipalities allow a level 1 or 2 charger everywhere and a level 3 charger only on industrial parts. Other people use it as a special land use, and places like New Orleans use the zoning only to prohibit it in the right of way. Your make-ready standards, basically, anytime you're doing new construction, you proactively support EVSE. And you do certain height and distance standards for the
for the modules you're going to be putting outside. You can also do certain requirements for parking space design and things like that. You know, if there's 100 parking spots, you need 2 with EVSE. There are a number of good different ideas for this, but it's important to be thoughtful, to act quickly, and to utilize opportunity. And I will turn things over to Molly.
All right, so I'll expand on what Max just talked about with the narrative. Based on that research, we drafted an ordinance for Swatara Township to include electric vehicle infrastructure for new commercial development. Just a little roadmap of what I'm going to discuss. We'll identify the problem, the proposed solution that we've put into the ordinance. We'll talk about some of the specifics that we put into the ordinance and then next steps. So currently, Swatara Township doesn't have any ordinances addressing electric vehicle infrastructure. And as Max referenced, there's a lot of federal funding coming through that will allow townships to take use of it and put that infrastructure in the township so that people have access. In addition to that, you know, these federal and state initiatives are propelling growth in that market. So this will likely continue to speed up as time goes on. So the current ordinances do not promote EVs in any way, and they're not addressed at all within the ordinances. This could make people less likely to visit the township or less likely to visit commercial opportunities within the township, and could ultimately impact both commercial and economic development. So the proposed solution that we settled on was to draft an ordinance that requires certain levels of electric vehicle parking spaces depending on the type of land use. So the priorities of our ordinance was to promote use of electric vehicles in the township, require new commercial development to install such parking spaces depending on this type of land use, and incentivize those owners to install the infrastructure. So within, we thought it was important to define commercial development in a specific way so that it might trigger existing commercial developments to eventually have to implement these requirements in the future. So this includes any new building or any new off-street parking facility, any improvement to an existing commercial building that increases its capacity by more than 50%, or any reconfiguration of a parking lot that would increase the parking lot capacity by more than 50%. We also thought it was important to define the different levels of charging that could be installed, so that way the ordinance can require either mid or fast charging. And this could also be implemented in a way that certain land uses require fast charging because people tend to only be there for an hour or something like that. If you'll take a look at the table, those are just placeholders and they can be modified for the township specific goals, but it breaks out the different land uses and percentages of parking spaces that should be electric vehicle. Additionally, based on Rob's comments, we'd like to include a certain percentage or be it one singular space for handicap EV parking, just to make sure that that's covered as well. We also included use restrictions just to make it clear that only electric vehicles should be able to park in these spots, and that enforcement of that falls on the property owners and not on the local police department. And another definition we wanted to include was that only road legal EV vehicles should be used in these parking spaces. People can't bring their recreational vehicles to plug them in and take advantage of that. And property owners also reserve a right to charge for this should they desire to. So looking to the future, we thought this would be a good first step in addressing electric vehicle infrastructure and kind of leave the door open should Swatara desire to put a process in for private residential property owners to have parking spaces for their properties. Yeah, so we'll take questions.
Guess you're kind of lead on this one too.
Thank you. Nice to meet you both. It's been good working with you. Thanks for listening to some of my ideas on this, because here again, this is another, emerging trend in our country, and this is something I think we'll very much consider in Swatara Township, and I think might benefit the Harrisburg area too, and some of the other townships that are thinking about doing this. One question, then a comment, that the source of the table you have with matching the land uses and the percentage of EV parking spaces for the off-street, what was the source of that table? Did you make that up? your
That
own,
was
or-
kind of derived from a variety of other
you?
ordinances that just had,
Okay,
so that was a placeholder, the percentages,
Mhm.
just kind of based on what other townships and municipalities have done.
it'll be, might be helpful to come up with some rational explanation for that, but you're right, it's a good place to start as a placeholder. And my comment, I just learned a little bit more this morning about, it's an idea that's been around for a while, but it's being promoted with our new Energy Infrastructure Act. The idea of community solar systems that, imagine, we'll even use the warehouse example. That warehouse with all the solar panels on the top could become the source of a community energy system that could feed some of the local, let's say, a parking area, accessible parking area where the electric vehicle owners are bringing in their cars. So there might be like a marriage that I could see happening in some communities, marrying those two together. So
Yeah.
great job, you guys.
Thank you.
One of the things I liked was you addressed when a parking space is blocked, which is, I know there's a term for it, and I can't remember what they call it. When you park your truck there, or whatever the heck it is, so you can't use the charging station, that you put the onus on the property owner. I think that's probably a better way than tying up the municipalities, police forces or whatever in that respect. So I think that's good. One of the things, did the look at, there's roughly 3 types of chargers right now.
Mhm.
I think Tesla announced today or yesterday that they are doing away with restrictions, and so anybody's going to be able to use their chargers now. But they're changing their whole marketing as speak.
Kind of like a universal charger.
Yeah. And I don't know how it's all going to work, because right now it's still kind of crazy, but is there any requirement for one type of charger so that you're not doing a level 1, but making mandatory level 2 at the minimum?
Yeah, I think if we were going with level 2 or level 3, just to ensure that people could charge their cars
And get out of there.
quickly. Yeah.
Okay, good. Thank you.
What, I know in your presentation, you talked about the level 3s and that some municipalities are only allowing them in like the industrial areas. Is there a reasoning behind that you're aware of, or?
Yeah, first of all, they're much more expensive, but they charge much more quickly. So if you were to put them on the turnpike or something, it would make much more sense than, if you go to Target, you're probably going to be in there for a good 40 minutes, and presumably you're not going to go to Target on a 6% battery like it would. So it's just a much more logistically, in terms of cost and practicality, it's a much more logistically feasible way of doing things. We're not going to require Target to buy the very expensive level 3s, but there's also shouldn't be that much need for them there.
So based on the use, would you look at like further regulating what type of percentage of level 1s or level 2s, level 3s would go per the use?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, I think at this point, it's still in such early stages that I don't know that they have that data. I haven't seen it if they do. But yeah, I mean, and that would be the kind of thing we're talking about with future proofing too, where you would be able to look at, like, maybe you would want to swap out a 1 for a 2, and you would want to have the capability of doing that, down the road.
Yeah, and the other question I had was, and I don't know if you found any of this in your research or anything, was related to the disposal of the batteries that come with the EV, like the electric vehicles. I understand like there are like issues now coming out where they're like spontaneously catch on fire if they're all like in the same place. I don't know if you saw anything on that in your research or had any thoughts on that.
I mean,
I
that
don't.
wasn't, that was kind of adjacent to the topic. It wasn't really, so we didn't get too much into that. That would be an interesting thing to think about as well, for sure.
Thanks.
And I think but I think that is in part encapsulated by some of the requirements put on the property owners to maintain them to a certain level. So hopefully they would catch that something was wrong with the batteries prior to something like that happening.
Thank you.
Thank you. I know a person from our office, and I don't know if you talked to Ben Warner, has been doing a lot of stuff. I hope he helped you out a little bit.
Yeah, we
He
met
did.
with him. Yeah, he was
Yeah.
great.
Okay, good. It's again, what we were talking about, the vehicles or the delivery type things. This is an emerging technology that we're not going to be able to understand until things kind of start happening. So we really appreciate you taking a crack at it. And I think as Robert indicated, some of the things that you're doing here will be something that we can build on as we get approached on some of these things. So I see your work being carried forward. So we appreciate it and we thank you. And nice job. So thank you. Very good.
Thank you.
Okay. Ultra urban micro farming.
I just press this one to advance it or? Just want to make sure. All right. All right, are you ready?
We're ready to roll.
Yep.
Okay.
My name's Michael Sands. I'm the lead for the narrative. I drafted it, and Wesley Trevino, he drafted the ordinance itself. We did a ultra urban micro farming for Susquehanna Township. For the roadmap, we have the introduction to the problem, how Susquehanna Township has addressed it, key elements of surrounding ordinances, and the environmental gains of micro farming. The problem that we determined that would be the reason, like what we're going for, is that we want the balance between the gains of farming, the normal gains of farming, like maintaining the benefits of farming and opportunities, but introduce that into a residential setting for the citizens, but also balance between the negative effects of farming, like deforestation, soil erosion, water and air pollution, stuff like that, that if you expand on traditional farming, will probably be more harmful than good than if we were to introduce the micro farming. So then I introduced here to what is micro farming. Like micro farming for our purposes was 3 or less acres, could be up to 5. The ordinance existing right now in Susquehanna Township goes up to 5 acres or more, so that wouldn't fit in our definition. So the existing ordinance right now doesn't address it at all. So there's really no ordinance at all. Micro farming for Susquehanna Township would be not involve animal or livestock or anything. It would just involve crops and stuff like that. So, and the idea is that we want to get ahead of the problem before, the storm gathers. We would like to elude or go through the storm. The key elements that I've addressed in the narrative were the plot size and location. I bundled a bunch of elements into public welfare and then the economic and social gains of it. Here for the ordinances around the area that I found to be helpful, mainly had stuff to do with livestock or beekeeping and stuff. Like out of zone, but Philadelphia city ordinance, they kind of like have the idea of what we would like to do. They have the 3 or less acres, smaller plot sizes, green roofs, community gardens. Those are the type of things that what we found was hard is that ordinances around the area do more about urban agriculture, why we want to make it more about micro farming for the crops. So Philadelphia is pretty much what we were looking for when we were modeling our ordinance and my narrative. The public welfare, a lot of stuff is existing in other agricultural ordinances, stuff like fencing, road improved storage, plot usage plans and permits, stuff like that. And then property line where this stuff is allowed to go when it comes to, since we'll be so tightly together in an urban setting. And we're talking about backyards is where we want to put the agriculture. It would be, where can we put that and where to address nuisances and stuff like that. We have that in the ordinance, and I address that in narratives, in a narrative based off of what other ordinances are doing. A lot of what we talked about for Susquehanna Township is that they would talk about giving benefits to the citizens and the residents of the area. So what we looked at the other ordinances, we saw economic and social gains for both. The economics being able to earn money through either, but the township earns money or the people earn money through their, agriculture, the work that they put in, and then the social gains would be able to eat the food that you have. If you're able to self-sustain is what we were talking about with this, the township was to sustain yourself by, filling the food gap of any type of thing. While if you're trying to move away from traditional farming, which wasn't really the idea, but mainly to add another idea that would be
sustainable. That would help for the filling the food gap while not going totally away from the benefits that you may find in farming. And then environmental gains from it, use less land because you're using already places that are already used, like your backyard. Philadelphia has the roofs. I've seen ideas about vertical greenhouses or green roofs, stuff like that. And it's also self-sustaining, so to help the community sustain themselves if you were to move away from anything like traditional farming or something like that. And then the rest of the way, Wesley is going to take over for the ordinance.
Good evening. My name is Wes Trevino. I took the lead on the ordinance drafting, and I'm going to walk you through a little bit of what Mike and I sort of decided to implement. So again, our ordinance is for the township of Susquehanna. Basically, it provides for yard gardens, community gardens, and community supported gardens is something that we've kind of not figured out completely yet. It's still a work in progress. We're kind of trying to figure out if we want to keep community supported gardens or kind of scrap that term because it's very similar to a community garden. But essentially, as you'll see when we go through here, we'll talk about the purpose, the different types of use categories that we have, a little bit about the procedure and enforcement in terms of applying for a permit, how you get the permit, what your appeal rights are, and then we'll take questions at the end. So we have four main purposes to address with this ordinance. Essentially, like my partners talked about, we want to incentivize people to grow their own crops while also minimizing negative impacts to their neighbors in particular. We had to talk a little bit about nuisance prevention in our ordinance. We also want to encourage people to grow food locally for themselves and for their community. There's a whole range of health benefits and quite frankly, social benefits too, to growing and producing your own food and keeping it in the community. That also kind of touches into fostering community development. And we also want to use and make better use of the green spaces to sort of not only enhance general quality of life, but also the aesthetic character and the neighborhood character. So essentially we broke up our ordinance into two use categories. The first is micro farming, where it's categorized as a garden in your yard. We view that as an accessory use of your existing residential area. You can also have accessory structures that we go into in the ordinance. Most of the accessory structures are only permitted to be up and within your residence for certain months, usually months when you're producing and yielding and having you're doing the actual growing of the crops, cultivation. And then the second category is the urban agriculture. That's where we look more at the community garden, community supported garden. It's a little bit larger in scale. There really with the community garden, the purpose is obviously providing self-sustenance, but sustenance for the community as well, building community character. So going a little bit more into micro farming, your permitted uses, it's going to be very small. I mean, we don't want someone to take a large plot of land and completely turn it into farming, but we also want people to make use of their existing land. You can build your yard garden in the front, side, or back. Really with both of these types of farming uses, we're talking about growing crops, consumption crops, so crops that you would eat yourself, but even things like flowers, other crops that are growing out of the ground that you're not really doing a lot of heavy industrial type of work to cultivate. And then we also again have the urban garden, like I said, larger scale, might be a primary use. You might buy this lot or use this lot primarily just for gardening. Again, same thing with the use and sale of crops at farm stands. That's for both. In our ordinance, we talk about signage for farm stands, where you can have farm stands, how many days a farm stand can be open, things of that nature. So jumping into procedure and enforcement, essentially you will complete an application and submit it to the Board of Zoning. The Board of Zoning, it should actually say the zoning officer. I'm sorry, this is a work in progress. So it should be, the application would go to the zoning officer. The zoning officer would review and accept or reject the application. Typical application stuff, you'd include the location, the name, description, what you're going to use it for. If you are granted a permit for a yard or for a community garden, that would be valid for 12 months. As it pertains to micro gardening or micro farming in your yard gardens, we're not going to require any sort of permit for that. It's just a little too invasive to go and try and enforce and make people pay to use their own land. It's just a no-brainer that we wouldn't require that. We also talk about appeals. So if a community garden application is rejected, again, work in progress, you would appeal to the Board of Commissioners, I believe is the correct appellate entity that would hear your appeal. And then in terms of permits, fees and uses, you'd have to apply for a permit one time. We were kind of thinking about a $50 to $100 fee. We haven't come up with an actual dollar amount yet. And then obviously, once you've been permitted to go start your community garden, you would renew annually for a smaller fee than the initial fee. And that's where we envision our ordinance going right now, but we'll open the floor to questions.
So Susquehanna is going to be meadows and gardens, right?
And chickens and bees. Chicken and goats.
And chickens and goats. And so everybody's going to be coming to Susquehanna and know of it.
We're really embracing the sustainability,
I know.
and environmentalism. You know.
So Terra, they're going to have
Warehouses.
eco warehouses.
Yeah, but they'll be
Yeah.
doing it sustainably, right?
That's right.
So
Well, we'll need to go to the Susquehanna to eat.
Yeah, I guess so.
all right. So
Sustainability.
Betsy,
Yeah.
go ahead.
I appreciate the job that you guys did on this. I know it was kind of a interesting topic when it was presented and had some challenges. One of the questions I had was, did you consider having any regulations for commercial uses to be able to do urban agriculture?
We honestly didn't consider commercial entities only for the fact that in most of our research, most of the micro farming and the ultra urban types of farming that we found were either like small community collectives or individuals. That's not to say that there couldn't be any sort of commercial aspect to this, but
Yeah, I just think of like a, like a restaurant that's from scratch or something that would be.
Yeah, I recently just was looking up things for the ordinance and the narrative, and there was a thing about grocery stores doing like they grow the food that they put in their stores right on top of the roof, like kind of like with the Philadelphia green roof type of thing. But it was kind of like really crazy idea, but it's more like, I guess ambitious than anything right now.
Yeah.
There's actually one of the restaurants in your community used to grow many of their vegetables right outside their back. Leeds.
Oh,
Yeah. Not that you need to know about it, but
Yeah.
yeah, they grew their tomatoes and peppers and such right on their property.
Yeah.
A couple of things came to mind.
idea.
The one community I was in, we had community gardens where we rented out the plots to the residents, and they were on a list. With one of the problems we had in the community garden, because it was divided into individual plots, was occasionally, too often though, somebody decided they just didn't want to bother taking care of the garden any longer. And it went to weeds and thistles and all kinds of stuff, and trying to maintain that to keep it from becoming a problem. I think that needs to be addressed, that, you don't get to that kind of situation.
I definitely agree. And that's not something that is in our ordinance right now. We are thinking about like civil fees. We did think about civil fees for, maybe not renewing your permit. But that's definitely something we'll take into consideration.
There's certainly the zoning officer or the assistant manager should be oversight of those areas, definitely.
Of course, of course. Of course.
Zoning officer, 100%.
Hey, Robert,
Giving me
anything?
more work, Ed.
Oh, well, yeah, job security.
I know, huh? I think my first thought is urban food planning is a whole field of study in itself these days. And having a supportive ordinance would certainly help. Because some of us who are fortunate to live in the suburbs and have a little property with a house and have a backyard, I have like 2 4x4 areas where I garden in, but I wish I could do, more. But it's a great, I think, way to encourage folks to do more gardening and kind of mix the landscaping work with the gardening work, and we'll have some really great properties in Susquehanna. So, good job. Thanks.
Appreciate it.
When the mention of commercial growing, something else, there's a commercial operation in Sharmanstown Borough, over in Cumberland County. Ames is their name. They make hardware equipment and stuff like this. They gave out to the residents in their community large plots on the ground owned by the company still. And they had to follow the owner's regulations, which were not very strict, but they had to clean up and maintain it. But the owner was ultimately responsible for it. I think that's something that they were very progressive in and using unused space. They said, why are we mowing this? Why are we maintaining this the whole time? And they provided tools in many cases for residents to use.
Oh, and I think that actually works kind of well with our issue of the community supported garden versus the community garden. Maybe it's corporate supported or corporate partnership garden or something like
I
that.
think that could be a very positive way if it can be worked out in some.
Yeah, it's something we'll definitely look into.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Okay, now we have commercial principal solar energy systems
And cookies.
and the cookie ladies.
Really.
I think they have another class.
All right, how do I use this? Oh, is this mic on? Yes, forward.
Do they really?
Backwards.
In football?
Forward, backwards.
Oh, all right.
Oh, that's not what we talked about.
You know how many words I can say in that time?
Carrie can say a lot and quickly. Good evening, I'm Lindsay Williamson. This is Carrie Nace, and we did our model ordinance on commercial principal solar energy systems. It's a mouthful. So the clients that we were working for is Tri-County Regional Planning Commission and also Cumberland County. TCRPC obviously oversees Dauphin and Perry counties, so we were working at 3 counties for 3 locations. So why solar energy? 80% of the world's energy comes from fossil fuels, which includes coal, oil, natural gas, and Pennsylvania is actually the 3rd largest producer of electricity in the country, which also means that we are using a lot of those things to produce electricity. Burning fossil fuels causes pollution, the formation of smog, acid rain, and increases carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. The good news is that each year the production of coal has actually decreased, with renewable energy has increased. There are 3 types of solar facilities. The first one is distributed generation, which is where solar energy is created and then used at that site. The second one is community solar, and this allows energy to be shared with neighboring properties. It is also not currently allowed in Pennsylvania. There has been legislation that's been proposed from both the Senate and the House that kind of hasn't gone anywhere at this point. We're hoping that it will soon, so that people can actually create energy at their home and then share it with their neighbor, which is great for people who live in apartments, people who rent, people who don't have good roofs, so that they can also tap into this solar energy system and get their energy that way. And then finally, we have utility scale, and this is solar farms. It's utility scale, it's the large farms that you see, and they have the ability to generate power directly onto the grid. Cumberland, Dauphin, and Perry counties, there's model ordinances out there, but in whole, solar ordinances have not been adopted. So that's part of the reason that we're addressing this today. It's a very upcoming technology, and it's really important that municipalities get in front of this. Only 13% of municipalities currently address solar energy, and of these, only 5% address commercial solar. So again, the farms that I was discussing. So speaking of farms, Pennsylvania is very much known for its farmland. It's beautiful. And as much as we want solar energy to come in, we also don't want to see it taking over all of these beautiful, lush farmlands that we have in Pennsylvania. Farmland's an ideal location for solar energy because it's flat or gently sloping, which means that it's easy to manage the actual solar panels and also allows the solar panels to get sunlight directly to them.
Farms with electric substations are particularly desirable for solar energy companies. And one thing that farmers need to consider when they are getting into a contract with a solar energy company is that it's usually 25 years. So it's a pretty long commitment for them to get involved with solar energy. And then one last thing is that municipalities, they also need to consider the impervious material of the solar panels and decide if it is impervious or not, because that also affects their stormwater management. Health concerns. Any new technology, people are always having lots of health concerns. Does this cause cancer? Is it going to leach into the water source? So in California, they have a lot more solar panels, obviously, than we do here. And even in forest fires, anything that's in the solar panels does not leach out. It actually has a lot of the same things in it that we have in our cell phones, which most of us carry around every day. And again, they don't leach out, so it doesn't actually cause any health concerns. And solar panels actually improve the soil and water quality around the panels themselves. So what we are proposing is agrivoltaics, which is kind of the best of both worlds. It's a combination of farming and photovoltaic energy, which is turning light into electricity. The panels situated like this and still allowing for farming creates a better condition for workers and animals because it provides shade. It increases the productivity of the plants that are around it, such as tomatoes. Solar panels benefit from the cooling effects of the photosynthesis from the plants that are around them. It encourages pollinators such as bees to thrive on the farms. And then another concern that people have about it is how it looks, which a lot of people, or a lot of municipalities, I should say, haven't considered this, but buffer zones would really help to deal with that. And that is just requiring a vegetated buffer basically around the whole area so that it blends seamlessly into the background. And you're driving by, you don't really know that it's a solar farm there. It must provide year-round coverage according to the ones who do have it. No less than 20% of the plants are pollinator-friendly species, and native plants are encouraged to be used for this. And then finally, decommissioning. Decommissioning can cost over $1 million, so it's very important that there's bonds included when farmers sign up for these programs and have solar panels put on their property. Although it is required, proponents of bonds do know that it is difficult to determine future costs. Now I'll turn it over to Carrie now.
All right, so the ordinance, I'm going to talk a little bit further away because I like to use my hands. The ordinance that we did, obviously, we have a huge region, Cumberland, Perry, Dauphin counties. Population is on the screen, is approximately 1,600 square miles. And if you look at it, the land area is roughly the same for all of these counties, 500 and change square miles for each of the counties. But what becomes interesting in trying to craft an ordinance for all of these areas and the diversity of what we're crafting is the population. Dauphin County, 546 people per square mile, pretty decent. Cumberland's right there with it, 476, very close. You get up to my Perry County, where I'm from, we've got 83 people per square mile. So we have a very diverse area that we're trying to accomplish a lot of things. And a fair point, part of Perry County doesn't even have zoning, but that's where we're at. So we tried to make something that was very vague and covers a lot of things. And throughout our ordinance, you see little asterisks because it can be adapted to the area that it's in and whether or not they really want to promote solar or they want to make it more limited. Our purpose was to promote it. We talk about the regulation for construction, operation, decommissioning. We still recognize that you need to protect the health, safety, and welfare of the property, the township, the municipality, whatever it may be. But we do want to promote the sustainable energy, electricity generation through a renewable resource. The sun's out there. We all have it. People don't worship it like we used to in the 80s and have the reflective things, but the sun's readily available. It's something we have and it's free. Improving economic conditions for the farm owners. They're making money off of this. They're decreasing their reliance on the system by generating their own power, and it actually increases different revenue streams. We went about this through a special exception. It'll be used only as it complies with the rest of the chapter. So we gave a whole lot of regulations and requirements that it has to meet. We're going to do 2 principal uses is what our basic principle is. Principal use, of course, is zoning, the agriculturally zoned area. And then the second is the CPSES, Commercial Principal Solar Energy System. Last time I'm saying that. You can do it 2 different ways through our ordinance. We have adjacent mixed use and same space mixed use. Mixed use solar, there's the definitions of them, but essentially, this is my solar cell. Here's my red rose tea duck from back in the day. Adjacent, they're just beside each other, same space. The ducks are literally chickens, whatever they are. The tomatoes are growing underneath the panels. So there's some benefits to that as far as the quality of the soil, like she said, the amount of water that you need to put on the plants because they're getting shading. So there's other various benefits to how they do it. And there are certain animals that we do really well with solar, like sheep. Certain animals you should keep away from solar, like our friends, the goats. Sorry, it's not coming to Susquehanna. We had a whole lot of things, and that's what that's showing as far as things that we addressed. And you can see there's just a list of concerns because there's a lot of concerns in the public about these. Thank you. I'm going to talk about a couple of these real quick. Considerations for neighbors. We all have the friendly neighbors, the people that call the township and make complaints or accommodations as rarely. So we have things specific for them: setbacks, screening and buffering, lighting, glare restrictions, and emergency management considerations, and then a complaint and concern line. We actually built that into the ordinance where they have to maintain a posted number that somebody from that number is going to call back whoever just called and complained within 72 hours. Setback, screening, and buffering, as she was saying, these are the numbers that we set up. There's the asterisks to change it depending on what we're doing. One of the biggest things that I want to point out on this is that for the screening and buffering, it's all vegetative. We want it to be similar to what's around it, but at least 25% of it should be pollinator friendly. You heard earlier the importance of our pollinator species. Decommissioning, we define when you've abandoned it or when you've ceased operations. We talk about the financial security, what we want as a municipality. We want you to put 110% of the estimated decommissioning costs, minus whatever you're going to get back from recycling materials, et cetera. And of course, we're going to promote recycling wherever we can. Done. Questions? Did I talk too fast? I'm sorry.
One, I dislike the special exception. I think it should be a right of use, a permitted use right. I'm going to use an example down in York County. Dover Township has been fighting a battle there where they had every crazy in the state come in and complain about waves coming off of the solar panels and causing problems. And the farmer had his land, his right to put different things on it. And he's been spending a fortune with the company trying to put this into place. I think it should be a right by right.
Okay.
I think that also protects, I think, the elected officials from having to deal with months and months of hearings. If people don't like it, move to another county. So I think that's really positive. I think the great article in the Pennsylvania, the Chesapeake Bay Journal last month, I think it is on very similar issues. So it's very, very pertinent topic.
Thank you. Thank you.
Very good job, ladies. Here, been having a problem lately with the idea of using up our valuable farmland for solar farms, but I think your pictures there have helped me. There's kind of I'm starting to realize the difference between like crop farming that we know it with big tractors and everything like that, which we do need at that scale. But then the other pictures you show where farmers are just like doing animal husbandry, having some crops growing underneath and letting the animals roam around except for the goats. So thanks for helping for me to understand that. Just a note on your bond for the future decommissioning that came up recently in my township for a new cell phone tower. They had to post a bond for decommissioning that. And I'm thinking, that tower could be sitting there for 30, 40, 50 years. And the township's supposed to hold a bond somewhere in their vault. So, it's a great idea. I don't really know how practical it is for the municipality to hold a bond for that long, but.
So we actually address that.
Okay.
For us, we have to have an engineer has to do a study every 5 years and reassess that bond value. So
Okay.
as long as the solar farm is in place, every 5 years they're looking at it. So at least it's being renewed.
So somebody's looking at it every 5 years?
Yeah.
Good point.
Yeah, because as I mentioned, decommissioning costs
That
are
is a
going
great idea.
to change. It's very vague right now. It's hard to tell 25 years down the road what's going to happen. So there's a big possibility, and we hope that a lot of these pieces can be recycled. And if that's the case, they could get some of their money back out of them. So that's going to definitely shift the amount of cost it's going to take to decommission them.
And to your other point, I have a friend that has a commercial farm. And when she heard that there's a place in Perry County that's looking at putting in solar panels, she was so excited because she's the sheep farmer in the area. She doesn't want to put in the panels, but she's going to get paid to take her sheep there and graze it potentially. So there's that aspect for some of our farmers too, even if they don't want to have that on their own property.
Yeah, I really like the idea, and I have not been aware of this like mixed use solar. Are there examples locally that you were able to find that do this? Or are there certain like?
We spoke with a lady who they're trying to bring it to Pennsylvania. One of the big issues right now with solar energy in general is the fact that there's not community solar. I think once community solar comes in the picture and people find out like, oh, you can, opt into this, even if you don't have access to, say, a roof, or you, like I said before, you rent. I think that'll really make the solar energy, like, what I want to say, business kind of blow up in Pennsylvania. I think because people can't share that energy and there's not really a way for them to make money off of it as much. It's kind of restricted right now, but like I said, there has been legislation proposed. So hopefully that's something that will get tackled in the next couple of years.
And it's certainly on the scope, the radar of the sustainable agriculture people. So the lady that the farm that I had, it's an organic farm. She's heavily involved in everything in the state, and that's in Perry County. So it's on their radar, at least, that if this comes to the area, it's a bonus for them.
They're just waiting.
Yeah, fingers crossed.
But before that happens, like municipalities should probably have rules in place so that they can kind of get a handle on what's going on before they're trying to fix something that's already happened.
The ladies, very nice job.
Yes.
Nice to see you in person.
I do want to compliment you on your, because you worked with us on this and with Cumberland County a lot, and we've been doing a lot of this stuff and we've talked a lot. So I do want to say you've done a really fantastic job.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right. Where did you find the phrase agrivoltaics? That's a.
Agrivoltaic. One of the ordinance, several of the ordinances, I think.
Yeah,
actually.
it's like a thing in solar
California.
energy.
It's probably a thing in California.
Oh, it's probably where it originated.
Well, as I was telling Betsy, there is a society for it. There is a
You can say it
Society of
back.
Agrivoltaics.
Got your notebook. I mean, I didn't really notice you, but.
Didn't I see? That's how
You know.
bad.
No, Max, you can sit up there. Yeah, stay.
Thank you, Lindsay.
All right, so I won't say last but not least, I will commend you for listening to everyone. And Dr. Dernbach, I think you should give everyone who stayed extra credit.
Really?
And so,
We get it 2 by default.
what's that?
Do we get it 2 by default?
That's up to him, but I would think that's
All
a
right.
special bonus. But again,
All right, so
for those of you before we start, and I know we have a few more minutes left, but for those of you who have stayed, thank you very much.
right, my name's Andrew. I'm the narrative lead on wellhead protection.
And I'm Sri, I'm the lead on the ordinance.
Okay, so we did wellhead protection. Wellheads, I actually thought it was oil at first, so I'm happy, or maybe not happy, it's not the right word, but it turned out to be water, something that I myself had not considered, but then I saw it and I'm like, that's actually important. So yeah, water comes from the ground, usually a lot of groundwater. I think it was, what was it, like a third, something, I don't know. Anyway, a good chunk of our water supply comes from underground. So I have it on here, dirt. More than 1/3 does come from underground, and it can very easily be contaminated from both above ground and below ground sources. So while the math itself is pretty complicated, the solution is very simple. Prevention is worth an ounce of prevention. I'm sorry, it's late. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Pennsylvania is not protected. The EPA set guidelines for states to follow in the 90s, but there basically hasn't been any real action on it because it's all devolved to local levels. So in action, so this is generally kind of an overview of what happens. I kind of analogize it to a slushy. You stick your straw in, you kind of suck it out, and then like, because the water kind of just, there's water and earth and stuff down below. So like, it's complicated. There's a lot of complicated math that us, the physics people, don't know because we don't do this stuff. We're not the dirt people. But anyway, so like there's the cone of depression, which is where like the slushy shrinks. And this can have an impact because, stuff can get into it, and that's bad because then your drinking water is polluted. So this is just another kind of representation. So the way wellhead protection works is you create zones using zoning. you'll have like an area around the wellhead itself that you have like very strict protections. And then you'll have one where it's the zone of depression, anything that can fall in. And then you'll have a broader zone of anything that kind of contributes to that from like groundwater. So, so the outer zone would be zone. So you can see here like zone 1, zone 2, and zone 3. Zone 1 is like I think they usually do like 100, 150 feet, meters. I don't know. I don't remember which, something along those lines. And then zone 2 would be like the area that directly contributes to the well. So it would be on the other one. You can see the depression zone. That would be like zone 2. And then zone 3 would be everything that contributes into that. So like just as the funnel, water goes downhill, just as the funnel is going to lead stuff into the well, stuff outside the funnel can go into the funnel, which then gets into the well. Usually they define it based on like a time of travel, which is the technical term for exactly what it sounds like. Again, the math is complicated. Don't ask me to go into it. I don't know it. But it also depends a lot on local conditions as well, which is one of the reasons why they do devolve it onto local things, because like it depends on your local ground sources, basically. So I think.
And so we're going to switch more over to the establishment of regulations and guidelines. So our legal authority, we found 2 places, the PA Municipal Planning Code and the PA Constitution, Article 1, Section 27, which both reflect the right to have clean, pure water. For the purpose, we all want clean drinking water. And so we need to eliminate groundwater contamination. But then we need to know what enters so that we can eliminate it. And then so we need to determine prevention and protection strategies. So as Andrew kind of mentioned, the establishment of the wellhead protected area, we defined it into 2 zones. Zone 1 has a travel time of 30 days and zone 2 has a travel time of 5 years. So the technical definition for time of travel is a measure of the time it will take the groundwater to travel from 2 different points. And again, this is a very mathematical modeling, and it's defined and it's very specific to the contaminant. So restrictions within the wellhead protection area really depends on the compound. There are about 5 characteristics that we look at: ignitability, corrosivity, reactivity, toxicity, and radioactivity. And then there's also specific activities that are very specific and regulated, such as gas stations and landfills. But then there are also some exceptions. So we can grant conditional permits, but they must be made in writing, and then we require regular environmental safety inspections. And also there are specific activities that can be exempted, such as transit of hazardous substances, landowners using them in their facilities, fuel used to supply emergencies, and regular businesses which are specifically selling the product. And then we also have procedural protocols, such as fees which shall be collected at the time of filing. And there are also incentives, such as complying with the Safe Drinking Water Act and incentive grants that are provided by the EPA and the PADP. And there are also specific permits that are enforced by the code enforcement officer. And those are usually made by application, made in writing, and they should be made within 30 days. And the judgment should be made within 30 days. And then there also is an appeal process. So the requirement for existing facilities include ongoing environmental following, supply of additional environmental information regarding advances. The facilities must make way of improvements in the latest types of devices, and there should be a contingency plan that must be created and submitted with the goal of notifying in cases of emergencies. So to control existing threats, you can have inspection, monitoring, and enforcement. An inspection is usually done by the code enforcement officer, and so they have the right to inspect the aquifer during reasonable hours. There's also monitoring, which is based on the activities and groundwater protection measurements. There's also enforcement, which if the owner of the property has led to contamination beyond what is reasonable, the CEO can dictate the owner to stop all their activities and prevent any further contamination. So we have laid out a spill prevention and control plan, which has about 6 steps. So we identified the wellhead protection area, the list of people and their contact information, a list of the type of the substances that are there, the pathway for these substances, and prevention protocols, and as well as the list of people that need to partake in compacting the spill. and which is usually based on their position in the facility. So building new facility requirements is really dependent on the contractor. They have the main responsibility in picking the site and assessing it. And then also before developing the facility, they have to make careful choices onto the building material so that the contamination is reduced if it does occur. And the guidelines to issue a permit include submitting an application detailing how the facility will combat the use of the regulated substance, such as its environmental risk is minimal. The penalties are essentially cleanup costs, and the monetary penalty can be up from 100 to 500. And if it's a corporation, it can be up to 10,000. And finally is an injunction. So any questions?
Thank you. I'll start this one, I guess, since this is something we asked. You had the tough task of doing something very, very, very technical in a project that that would be hard for engineers to handle. So I commend you for jumping into that well.
Yeah, and it's
So-
also not a novel topic. So there was lots of research, but then that doesn't necessarily pertain to our specific area or site.
Exactly. And a lot of what's happening is at the state level as well, because a lot of it's environmental protection. So in essence, you know, I commend you on a lot of the things that you did to kind of put all this together, and that's, you know, admirable and everything. Like I said, you had a tough task in front of you. The only thing I would recommend is take a look at some of the other ordinances that are out there. The way you have your front end document, you kind of have it for, you know, like, we like to take these ordinances and say, okay, here, Susquehanna Township, you can use this, whereas you kind of have a little bit of a muddled type beginning on that one.
Yeah,
So
I think for the ordinance, for my part, it was hard for us to write concrete so-called rules because we didn't know where to go with
Right.
how specific the rule had to be.
exactly, and that's almost in some ways, you know, that's something an engineer would have to give someone like us who are writing it and saying, okay, what can we do, and then formulating it from that point to do it. So again, that's very hard, and it's
Yeah, and I think when we met, you mentioned agriculture was a big part of the land use. And I don't think we really integrated much of that.
well, no, and that's where a lot of these wells are. They're in agricultural areas, and you have agricultural fertilizers and things like that, manure spreading, and
Which are part of the exemptions essentially.
you have to be careful about that because of the Right to Farm Act. So again, the only suggestion I have is take a look at the beginning. The rest of the things, it could be good, it could be, you know, crazy, but again, that's more of an engineering thing. But the format that, as I mentioned before, who, when, how, at what cost, and what are the penalties, I think you have all that
And I
there.
think we also struggled with defining the levels of authority, like we call them the code enforcement officer. Should it be like the borough council or the municipal council? Stuff like that.
It's, yeah, I think maybe just stick with one and kind of go with that, so.
If I might interject, one of the things we found is that there is, for the technical side of things, I do believe that either the EPA or I think the state level will provide some assistance for setting it up. So the technical, if you apply with if you say we have this wellhead protection ordinance to the state, I think the DEP.
Yes, in
said
fact, they will
provide
pay,
you.
they will pay for it, yes.
Yeah.
So, and in fact, that's even hard though, even though they're paying for it, municipalities don't want to do it for some reason.
Yeah, and
but-
it's just because like, that's what honestly, the moment I saw it, I'm like, there's a lot of people around here who are probably gonna be like, keep my hands off my wealth. I'm like, wow.
Yep.
Yeah, and I think I also mentioned the super fund. But I don't know if that was too much of a stretch.
Okay, yeah,
Stay away from that.
Yeah.
Stay away from that.
So, all right, I'm sorry I took up most of that time.
Very
Any
good.
questions?
It's an issue that may not be really for Susquehanna Township or even Swatara Township, but there's places in the state where it is really, really important because their major source of water is a well.
Yeah.
And once you contaminate, it can take 100 years to clean it up.
Yes.
Very good.
My only comment was, I noted that it looks like a lot of the references you have are like EPA and Wisconsin and that type of thing. I believe Shrewsbury Township in York County has a pretty good ordinance on wellhead protection, if you want to look at that one. And I know I was on a board for wellhead protection in Penn Township in Lancaster County.
I think we use that.
Lancaster, there was Lancaster, and I think there was Gettysburg. For some borough in Gettysburg.
Yeah,
Son of-
and
son of a
like, I mean,
Westchester.
it's very intensive. I mean, Jerry's right, like, I know the binders we had that went with it, and then they were like top secret too, because you don't want your well to get like.
Yep.
It's
Yeah,
kind
you
of
don't want
crazy.
to, you don't
Yeah,
want to
you
show
don't
where,
want to like, you don't post it online because they don't want people to know like what
Yeah,
those wells
because
are.
that'll expose.
Yeah,
That's why they have the big fence and the tanks around them, so that, no one knows it's a well.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, they don't all have.
Dover Township in York County has a wellhead protection program also.
Okay, thank you.
My
It was
thought,
Dover, Shrewsbury,
Shrewsbury
Shrewsbury.
in York, yeah.
York, okay. I'll look them up.
And then like.
Yeah, we used the longest. one.
Use the Lancaster one I said.
Hey, Robert, any last comments?
yeah, my thought on this one is, this is a situation where it's critical that sometimes you have different entities maybe working at odds or where you need them to work together, because the entity that is proposing the well for public water supply could be a private or a public entity.
Yeah.
So they have to depend on the local municipality here in Pennsylvania to set up those protection zones and enforce the zoning so that you don't have incompatible land uses, ending up in the vulnerable zones that potentially could, pollute the ground, the well that people are depending on for the drinking source. So it is, just think that, so I don't know, when you're writing that ordinance, think, there's got to be a way for the municipality to work with the public water supplier to implement it.
Okay, it's like how the public funnels into the private. land
It
use.
could, so that well could be owned by a public entity like a water authority, or it could be a private entity like
Okay.
Suez Water, or,
Yeah.
somebody like that. So
Okay.
those, the
Mhm.
entity that owns the well and is drawing the water out is different than the people who are trying to protect the water.
Okay, understand.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very
Well
much.
done. And with that, sorry, John, we went about half an hour over.
That's pretty good for us.
So you folks, have any last thoughts you want to share with the students who are still here? By the way, a lot of them had an 8 o'clock class.
Oh, okay, all right, sorry, I kind of judged me,
I think it was great presentations.
Yeah.
Hey, Robert, do you have any last reports?
I was just going to say, for those of you students that found this type of law interesting to work on, municipal ordinances and things like that, I think the field is very fertile for attorneys out there to either work on the private side with clients that need changes to the local ordinances, or for attorneys that end up working on the solicitor side, advising the governing bodies of the municipalities on what the right ordinances are to have in place and how to actually enforce them. So it's a very interesting body of law to study. So good luck.
Ed?
No, I second what Robert was saying. Presentations were well done, topics were well developed, and they're real world. They're not make-believe, they are real world issues. I think most of us have seen some of these things in our experiences, and they are what give you gray hair at the end of the night.
You're only 29, right?
No.
I agree. It was a great pleasure to work with you guys. I always love being able to see like students learn about this type of law. It's definitely different, I think, than what you typically are looking at. And I know it's kind of an exercise in frustration sometimes, just because there's so many different, are you doing it for a specific organization? And then what authorities do you have to do that? But I think you guys all did a good job on looking at that.
Yes, thank you for letting us take a look at it, and thank you for sharing your talents, and we look forward to seeing you in the future when you're doing bigger and better things. Thank you.
You'll be my next solicitor, right?
Let's give our.
And safe driving. I don't know what it's like out there.
Professor.
I just looked at stuff, it's like raining now,
Yes,
right?
thank you.
All right, safe travels home.
Switch this.